I'm Bill Smith, and Al Adams is working the clicker for us today. And we're with the North Carolina Beach Buggy Association, and our topic today is the evolution of beach buggies. But really, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of four-wheel drive vehicles, and then some about the history of beach driving on Hatteras Island. The term beach buggy often brings to mind something other than vehicles that we see out on our beaches. At one time or another, various types of vehicles have certainly driven on our beaches, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk about things that can legally be driven on the sand. And certainly this dune buggy and UTV don't meet that criteria. Back in the early days of beach driving, it was always a good idea to have a few extra people with you to give you that frequently needed push. One of the gentlemen pushing in the picture on the left was the governor of North Carolina, J. Melville Broughton, during a 1941 visit to promote access here to Hatteras Island. Getting stuck was a regular part of driving back in those days, as was pushing and getting pushed. The first roads on Hatteras Island were referred to as Route 101 because they seemed to crisscross so many times back and forth across the island. The picture on the right shows three generations of Stephen Burris ladies enjoying some beach time on top of a Model A with balloon tires. Possibly in the 1950s, pictured are Emma Gilbert Stevens, Rebecca Stevens Burris, and Dixie Burris Browning, who's here with us today. And over the years, some things haven't changed. Although these 35 by 12 and a half R15 tires were not available until many years later, these pictures provide a good idea as to how vehicles in those early days drove up and down the beach, aired down with two-wheel drive. And like we said, some things don't ever seem to change. But we do want to thank our friends at OBPA for working to try to make people more aware of the need to air down when they're out there on the beach. So we all appreciate that. The advent of early ferries, along with our love of driving, meant that before long, more cars and trucks were being carried across Oregon Inlet to Hatteras Island. And this is another picture of the ferry Barcelona, which was another that brought cars over here to the island. For the first 30-plus years of vehicles arriving on Hatteras Island, travel was done on the beach or on sand roads, using two-wheel drive cars, trucks, and buses. As our friend Elizabeth Browning Fox reminded us, prior to 1950, all vehicles on Hatteras Island were ORVs. This slide shows a bus operated by Stocky Midget and his brothers that carried passengers up and down the beach and over to Manio and back. And Stocky recently passed away, and he is in this picture somewhere. Many coming here to the island wanted to access the beaches and get to their favorite spots. Some enterprising Hatterismen offered taxis to take anglers to their special locations on the beach, possibly similar to the vehicle here in this picture. Although four-wheel drive vehicles were manufactured in the early 1900s, they were not readily available until much later. With World War II came the mass production of four-wheel drive vehicles. The first vehicle in the history of four-wheel drive was built by Porsche, and it had electric hub motors on each wheel, and that's the vehicle up top. And NASA, actually years later, used the same design to put its lunar vehicle in motion. The first mechanical four-wheel drive was built by a Dutch company in 1902. And due to Porsche's unusual design, the Spiker vehicle, the one in the bottom picture, is considered to be the world's first four-wheel drive car. The first U.S. four-wheel drive vehicle was built in 1911 by the Four-Wheel Drive Company. FWD supplied 4x4 trucks to both the British and the U.S. armies during World War I. The advent of four-wheel drive vehicles made driving on the beach a great deal more practical. These four-wheel drive vehicles, the Nash Quad military truck on the left and the Oshkosh truck on the right, date back to the early 1900s. It was World War II production that made four-wheel drive vehicles more commonplace and readily available to the consumer. One of the most popular and beloved four-wheel drive vehicles is the Jeep, which had its beginnings late in 1903 when our military was looking for a light, rugged vehicle capable of traveling over rough terrain. By the early 1940s, the Jeep evolution had begun. Because American Bantam, the original Jeep manufacturer, did not have the production capacity to produce the number of Jeeps or vehicles that the military needed, the government encouraged Willies Overland Motors and Ford Motor Company to also build Jeeps, meeting the military designs. Within a period of weeks, the Willies Quad and the Ford Pygmy were available for testing. And Willies Overland Motors won the government contract because their engine was the most powerful of the three. They received an order for 16,000 vehicles, and over 640 Jeeps were produced during World War II by these three companies. The Ford GPW and the Willies MB were so similar, the only way you could tell them apart was to locate the nameplates. These vehicles not only led to a post-war emphasis that is popular to this day, but created a surplus market that many private owners took advantage of. Al Adam had a buddy in high school whose dad purchased a Navy surplus Jeep for $75 in the mid-1950s, and he drove it to the train station every day until he retired in the late 1960s. Of course, Jeeps were among the first four-wheel drive vehicles to hit our beaches here on Hatteras Island, and have been showing up in great numbers for almost 70 years. This is an early Jeep, and proving too that Jeeps can get stuck in the sand. Not far behind the Jeeps came the Dodge Power Wagon. They became commercially available around 1946. And the picture at the top is a fully restored 1946 Dodge Power Wagon. And then the lower picture just shows one of the many variations of the Power Wagon, and this is a 1950 Woody. This picture you saw earlier is a courtesy of the National Park Service, and it appears to be a Power Wagon with a utility or perhaps an ambulance body, and it may well be an example of a vehicle used by local guides to provide a taxi service for fishermen out onto the beach. And these next two pictures are just more examples of early four-wheel drive vehicles. The Willies Wagon, another popular beach vehicle, was utilitarian and didn't change much for many years, as evidenced by the 1950s model on the right, and then on the left, on the bottom, the 1963 model. This picture shows Ralph Barra, NCBBA member number 82, out on the beach. His son believes this picture was taken in the early 1970s. And he's got a sweet-looking ride, and it's a flat surf that day. This is a Jeep that belonged to my wife Pam and I, and it reflects not only just the evolution of Jeeps over the years, but also how they've changed, but also the different forms of rod racks that we see on vehicles out on the beach. This one's on the rear of the vehicle and swings away, and many fishermen are very creative in how they transport their gear. Through the 1950s, the only GM or Ford four-wheel drive light trucks were available by kits offered by aftermarket outfitters. In 1959, Ford introduced its light-duty factory four-wheel drive, and GM followed a year later. The International Scout was a popular four-wheel drive from 1961 until 1980, when production ceased. It was one of the first that would be classified as an SUV or sport utility vehicle. Other popular SUVs were Ford Broncos, and later Explorers and Expeditions, Chevrolet Suburbans, Blazers, and later Tahoes, and Jeep Wagoneers and Toyota Land Cruisers were also vehicles that dominated the market. At the top two pictures, you see past NCBBA President John Newbold with a couple of his international scouts doing what he always loved to do best. At the bottom is longtime NCBBA member and previous board member Dave Wigginton with his Subaru Brat and his bride Linda with a nice catch behind his K5 Blazer. The Scouts and Blazers became very popular beach vehicles. Today's version of the Blazer is the Tahoe, and the Scout went out of production in 1980. This is a Ford Expedition, and it's also another popular vehicle we see out on the beaches a great deal. This is NCBVA founder and first president Bob Preston adjusting license plate number 1 on his Jeep Wagoneer. And this is another picture of John Newbold with the Jeep Wagoneer that he wore out on the beach. Far and away the most popular vehicle on our beaches is the pickup truck. This picture of Ed and Bob Lick was taken in 1972 when 22-pound bluefish, such as the big one that Bob is holding, were not all that uncommon on our beaches. Pickups of every variety, even Dan Supplee's Chevy, will make it on and off the beach. And Dan, you know, Al had to get that in there. But by the way, I do want to point out, Dan was our second place winner in our Red Drum tournament last week with his 49-inch drum. And this slide shows one type of rod, cooler, and storage configuration. And you see so many different variations and different setups when you're walking up and down the beach. This is an efficient and readily accessible tackle storage option. Here's another rod, cooler, and spike storage option. Or you can be ready for anything in the world that might come up, like Brian Lester is with his truck. And these next couple of slides show how much Jeff Lukens packs all the tools on his Jeep. You can always tell when you see Jeff coming, there's stuff hanging everywhere. Or you can just have a plain Jane fishing rig, and it looks like these guys do pretty well with it. Or you can spend $350,000 on this Mercedes and have a house on wheels. But finally, the most important thing is to get out on the beach, be safe, have a good time, and we hope we see you all out there. Thank you.